Some losses never stop echoing, no matter how many years pass. The snow began falling before sunrise over the Rocky Mountains, turning the world into a silent ocean of white. Wind swept across the ridges and through the towering pine trees, carrying icy crystals through the air like drifting ghosts. Officer Michael Dawson pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped from the search vehicle and looked toward the mountains ahead. Beside him stood Duke, his German Shepherd partner. The dog was 8 years old, powerful, disciplined, and fearless. For nearly 6 years, they had worked side by side. They had searched forests, rescued stranded hikers, and helped bring frightened families back together. Wherever Michael went, Duke was there. Wherever Duke went, Michael followed. That was simply how it had always been. The emergency call had arrived the previous evening. A solo hiker had gone missing near an isolated trail system deep in the mountains. Temperatures were dropping fast. A winter storm was moving in. Every minute mattered. By mid-morning, the search teams spread across the rugged terrain. Snow continued falling harder with each passing hour. Visibility shrank. Radio traffic crackled through the cold air. Michael trusted Duke more than any map or compass. The German Shepherd moved confidently through the forest, nose close to the ground, following scents invisible to human senses. Again and again, Duke glanced back toward Michael, making sure his partner remained close behind. Around noon, the weather turned worse. Thick clouds swallowed the sky. Wind howled between the trees. Snow covered footprints almost as soon as they appeared. Several search teams were ordered to regroup before conditions became too dangerous. Michael received the same instruction through his radio. Reluctantly, he turned back toward the staging area, with Duke leading the way. Then something changed. Duke stopped. His ears rose. Every muscle in his body became rigid. Michael recognized the signal instantly. The dog had found something. "What is it, buddy?" he asked. Duke darted forward into the trees. Michael followed immediately. Branches scraped against his jacket as they pushed deeper into the forest. Snow swirled around them. The German Shepherd disappeared briefly behind a cluster of pines before reappearing farther ahead. Michael called his name. Duke looked back once, then continued running. Faster now. Determined. Focused. Michael struggled to keep pace through the deep snow. A gust of wind roared through the valley, reducing visibility to only a few yards. For a moment, the world became nothing but white. Michael shouted again. "Duke!" No answer. Only the wind. He pushed forward. Another few yards. Then another. His heart pounded harder with every step. The radio on his shoulder crackled with urgent calls from other teams, ordering everyone to return. But Michael barely heard them. He searched desperately between the trees. Looking, listening, hoping. Then the storm swallowed everything. The trail disappeared. The tracks vanished. The forest became an endless maze of snow and shadow. And for the first time since they became partners, Michael could not find Duke. Standing alone beneath the raging storm, staring into the white emptiness where his best friend had disappeared only moments earlier, he felt a fear unlike anything he had ever known. The storm did not ease when darkness arrived. If anything, it became worse. Searchlights cut through the snow like pale knives, disappearing into endless sheets of white before reaching the trees. Michael Dawson refused to leave the mountain. Hour after hour, he called Duke's name until his voice grew hoarse. Rescue teams searched ravines, frozen streams, and narrow trails buried beneath fresh snow. Every few minutes Michael thought he heard something. A distant bark. A movement between the trees. A familiar sound carried by the wind. But each time he followed it, he found only silence. By midnight, the incident command team ordered everyone to suspend operations until daylight. Conditions had become too dangerous. Michael stood beside a rescue vehicle covered in snow, staring into the darkness where Duke had vanished. One of the team leaders placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will continue at first light." Michael nodded, but the words felt empty. Duke had never failed to return before. Never. The next morning brought clear skies, but little hope. Helicopters joined the search. Volunteers arrived from neighboring counties. Tracking specialists examined every possible route. Day after day, the operation continued. The missing hiker was eventually found alive several miles away, sheltered inside an abandoned mining structure. He remembered seeing a German Shepherd during the storm. He even believed the dog had helped guide him towards safety before disappearing into the blizzard. The story spread quickly among the search teams. For a brief moment, hope returned. If Duke had survived long enough to reach the hiker, perhaps he was still out there. The search expanded. Another day passed. Then another. Fresh snowfall erased tracks almost as quickly as they appeared. Mountain lions, steep cliffs, frozen rivers, and thousands of acres of wilderness stood between Michael and the answers he desperately wanted. After 3 weeks, officials made a decision nobody wanted to make. Active search operations would end. Michael listened in silence as the announcement was delivered. The room felt smaller with every word. Maps were rolled up. Equipment was returned. Radios fell quiet. One by one, people moved on. Michael could not. Back at the police station, something felt wrong. Every hallway, every doorway, every corner reminded him of Duke. The German Shepherd's training vest still hung exactly where it had always been. His leash remained on its hook. His water bowl sat untouched near the kennel. Michael walked inside the empty enclosure and stood there for a long time. The scent of disinfectant mixed with old memories. He could almost hear Duke's footsteps against the concrete floor. Almost see the dog running toward him after a successful training exercise. But the kennel remained silent. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. The seasons changed. Snow melted from the mountains. Spring arrived. Then summer. Yet every morning before beginning his shift, Michael stopped beside the empty kennel. He never moved the leash. Never packed away the vest. Never removed Duke's photograph from his desk. Most people eventually stopped talking about the missing dog. The world kept moving forward. Michael tried to do the same. But every time he looked toward the mountains beyond town, a small part of him still expected to see a familiar silhouette walking out of the trees and coming home. For years passed. The mountains remained exactly where they had always been, rising above the town like silent witnesses that refused to speak. Winters came and went. Snow covered the ridges, melted into spring rivers, and returned again. Pine Hollow changed with the seasons. New officers joined the department. Local businesses opened and closed. Children grew older. Life moved forward. Yet for Michael Dawson, one part of the past remained frozen. Every morning before his shift began, he unlocked his office and glanced toward a photograph sitting beside his computer. It showed a younger version of himself kneeling beside Duke after a successful search operation. The German Shepherd's ears stood proudly upright. His eyes were bright. His tail blurred from excitement. Visitors often noticed the photograph. Few asked about it anymore. Most already knew the story. The missing K9 had become part of local history. On quiet evenings, Michael sometimes drove beyond town limits and parked near the foothills where the mountains began. He would sit inside the truck as the sun disappeared behind distant peaks. The scent of pine drifted through the open window. Occasionally, he imagined seeing movement among the trees. A familiar shape. A familiar gait. Hope still lived somewhere deep inside him, though he rarely admitted it aloud. One autumn afternoon, the police department received new equipment for its K9 unit. Younger handlers gathered in the training yard with energetic dogs eager to learn. Michael watched from a distance. The sound of barking echoed across the field. Memories returned immediately. He remembered Duke clearing obstacles with effortless confidence. He remembered long training sessions beneath summer heat. He remembered the way the German Shepherd would glance back after every command, searching for approval from the one person who mattered most. A younger officer approached him. "You ever think about getting another partner?" Michael smiled politely. The question had been asked many times. The answer never changed. Not yet. The officer nodded and walked away. Michael remained standing beside the fence long after everyone else returned inside. The truth was simple. No dog could replace Duke. He never expected anyone to understand that completely. Back in his office, one object remained untouched despite the passing years. Duke's leash still hung beside the old kennel records. The leather had aged. The metal clip had lost some of its shine. But Michael could never bring himself to put it away. Every few months someone suggested storing it. Every time he refused. Then came the morning he never expected. Rain tapped softly against the station windows while Michael worked through paperwork. The town was quiet. The kind of ordinary day that seemed destined to be forgotten. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message notification appeared from an unfamiliar number. Attached was a photograph. At first glance, it looked unremarkable. A wooded area somewhere in the mountains. Tall pines. Fallen leaves. Gray afternoon light. Then Michael leaned closer. Near the edge of the image stood a German shepherd. Thin, older, nearly hidden among the trees. Most people would have dismissed it immediately, but Michael's heart stopped. Because even after 4 years, there was something about those eyes he recognized instantly. And for the first time in a very long time, hope returned stronger than fear. Michael stared at the photograph for nearly 5 minutes without moving. Rain continued tapping against the office window while the image filled his screen. The dog in the picture was older, much thinner than the powerful German shepherd he remembered. The coat appeared rough and uneven. One ear seemed slightly bent. The animal stood partially hidden among pine trees, watching whoever had taken the photograph. To anyone else, it was simply a stray dog. To Michael, it felt like looking at a ghost. His hands trembled as he opened the message. The sender introduced himself as Ethan Brooks, a backpacker who spent most weekends exploring remote trails deep in the mountains. Ethan explained that he had seen the dog several times over the previous month near an abandoned ranger cabin almost 60 miles from Pine Hollow. The animal always kept its distance. It never approached people. It never stayed long. But there was something unusual about it. The dog wore a weathered collar. Ethan had managed to take the photograph before the German shepherd disappeared back into the forest. Michael enlarged the image again. His pulse quickened. There, beneath years of dirt and wear, he noticed a faint piece of metal attached to the collar. It was impossible to read clearly, yet he knew exactly what it might be. A K9 identification tag. Within an hour, Michael was speaking directly with Ethan over the phone. The hiker described the location in detail. The abandoned cabin sat deep within a forgotten section of national forest where few visitors traveled. Harsh winters and rough terrain kept most people away. Ethan admitted he initially thought the dog belonged to someone living off the grid. But after seeing the animal repeatedly alone, surviving on its own, he began to suspect otherwise. Michael listened carefully. Every word pulled him closer to a hope he had spent years trying not to feel. By sunset, he had already submitted leave paperwork and packed his truck. The old leash still hung beside his desk. For 4 years it had remained untouched. Now he carefully removed it from the hook. The leather felt familiar in his hands, almost sacred. He placed it gently on the passenger seat before beginning the long drive into the mountains. The highway stretched beneath fading autumn light. Golden leaves covered the hillsides. Clouds drifted above distant peaks. As miles passed beneath the tires, memories returned one after another. Duke racing through training fields. Duke finding missing hikers. Duke sitting patiently beside campfires after long search operations. The dog had never once abandoned him. Not ever. Somewhere after midnight, Michael stopped at a small roadside motel near the forest boundary. Sleep refused to come. He sat beside the window staring into the darkness beyond the parking lot. The mountains waited out there. Silent. Unchanged. Keeping their secrets. At dawn he resumed the journey. Narrow roads twisted deeper into the wilderness. Cell service disappeared. Pine trees crowded both sides of the road. Eventually the pavement ended entirely. By late afternoon, Michael reached the trailhead Ethan had described. Cold wind moved through the forest. Fallen needles covered the ground. The abandoned ranger cabin lay several miles ahead. Michael stepped from the truck and looked toward the trees. For the first time in 4 years, he was no longer searching a memory. Somewhere beyond those pines, a German shepherd was waiting. And deep inside his heart, Michael feared only one thing more than finding nothing at all. Finding Duke and discovering he no longer remembered him. The trail wound deeper into the mountains with every step. Pine needles softened the ground beneath Michael's boots while cold air carried the scent of earth, moss, and distant snow. The farther he traveled, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no radios, no voices, only the wind moving through the trees. The abandoned ranger cabin appeared just before sunset. Time had not been kind to it. The roof sagged beneath years of weather. Several windows were broken. Vines climbed the walls. Fallen branches rested against the porch. Michael stopped several yards away and studied the area carefully. Ethan's photograph had been taken somewhere near this spot. His heart beat harder as he examined the ground. There were tracks, faint but visible. Canine tracks, larger than a coyote, fresh enough to matter. Hope stirred again. He slowly approached the cabin and noticed something else. Beside the porch sat an old metal bowl partially hidden beneath leaves. Nearby lay scattered animal bones left by nature and time. The signs were unmistakable. Something had been surviving here. For how long? Nobody could know. Michael spent the next hour quietly exploring the surrounding area. He called Duke's name several times, but the forest gave no answer. Shadows lengthened between the trees. Golden sunlight filtered through the branches before slowly fading into dusk. Finally, he built a small camp a short distance from the cabin. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset. A small lantern cast warm light across the clearing while darkness gathered beyond the pines. Michael sat alone beside the glow, staring at the old leash resting across his lap. For years of wondering, for years of unanswered questions. Part of him feared tomorrow, because tomorrow would finally bring the truth. Either Duke was here, or he was not. Sleep came slowly. Every sound outside the tent pulled him awake. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Several times he stepped outside and searched the darkness, convinced he had seen movement between the trees. But each time the forest remained silent. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Frost coated the ground. Michael poured coffee from a thermos and began searching again. Hours passed. The mountain seemed determined to reveal nothing. Then shortly after noon, he noticed something unusual near a narrow stream. Fresh tracks. Larger this time. His pulse quickened. He followed them carefully through a stand of pine trees. 50 yards. Then 100. The tracks continued uphill toward a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. Michael moved slowly now, afraid that even the sound of his footsteps might scare away whatever left them. The forest grew quiet. Unnaturally quiet. Then he saw movement. Not far ahead. Between two massive pine trunks. A shape. Gray and gold. Thin. Motionless. Watching him, Michael froze instantly. His breath caught in his throat. The animal remained partially hidden within the shadows. For several long seconds, neither moved. The distance between them could not have been more than 30 feet. Michael felt his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The dog looked older than he remembered. Smaller somehow. Time had left its mark. Yet there was something painfully familiar in the way he stood. Something impossible to mistake. The wind shifted gently through the trees. The animal raised its head slightly. And for the first time in 4 years, Michael found himself staring into a pair of eyes he had never forgotten. For a moment, neither moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them. Wind whispered through the pine branches high above, carrying the scent of cold earth and distant snow. Michael stood frozen on the ridge, afraid that even the smallest movement might shatter the fragile moment unfolding before him. The German shepherd remained between the trees. Older, thinner. His once powerful frame appeared worn by years of survival. Parts of his coat had faded. One shoulder seemed stiff. Yet those eyes remained exactly the same. Amber. Intelligent. Watchful. Michael felt emotion rising so quickly he could barely breathe. For years of questions suddenly stood 30 feet away. He swallowed hard and took one careful step forward. The dog immediately tensed. Not aggressive. Cautious. Like an animal that had spent too long depending only on itself. Michael stopped. His heart ached at the sight. Duke had once trusted him more than anyone in the world. Now uncertainty stood between them. The years had built a wall neither of them knew how to cross. Slowly, Michael lowered himself to one knee. He wanted to appear smaller. Familiar. Safe. The old leather leash remained tucked inside his jacket pocket. He could feel its weight against his chest. For several seconds, he simply looked at the dog. Then he spoke the name he had carried inside his heart every single day for 4 years. Duke. The German shepherd's ears twitched. Michael saw it immediately. A tiny reaction. Small enough that most people would have missed it. But Michael knew every movement that dog had ever made. Hope flickered. Tears blurred his vision. Duke, he said again, softer this time. The dog tilted his head. The gesture struck Michael like a memory brought to life. Duke had always done that during training when listening carefully for a command. Another step. Then stillness. The German shepherd continued watching him. Uncertain. Searching. As if reaching through years of silence toward something almost forgotten. Michael's voice trembled. It is me, buddy. The words barely escaped. Emotion tightened his throat. The forest remained silent except for the wind. Then something changed. The dog took one hesitant step forward. Michael's breath caught. Another step followed. Slow. Careful. The distance between them began to shrink. 20 feet. 15. 10. Tears slipped down Michael's face now. He made no effort to hide them. Duke paused again. His nose lifted slightly, testing the air, searching through scents carried by the breeze. Then recognition arrived. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It spread across the old dog's face like dawn breaking over a dark landscape. His eyes softened. His posture changed. The caution disappeared. In its place came something Michael had feared was lost forever. Trust. Duke's tail moved once. Then again. The German shepherd let out a quiet sound that was almost a whine and almost a sigh. For years of separation seemed to vanish in that single moment. Michael covered his mouth as emotion overwhelmed him completely. Duke. This time the dog did not hesitate. He began walking toward the man he had never truly forgotten. And as the distance between them disappeared beneath the mountain pines, Michael realized that some bonds are stronger than time itself. Duke stopped only a few feet away. The forest seemed brighter somehow, though the afternoon sun was already slipping toward the horizon. Michael remained kneeling on the cold ground, unable to take his eyes off the dog he had spent 4 years searching for. Up close, the changes were impossible to ignore. Duke's muzzle carried streaks of gray. His ribs showed beneath his coat. Small scars marked parts of his body where time and survival had left their signature. Yet none of that mattered. He was alive. That single truth overwhelmed everything else. Slowly, Duke stepped closer. His nose reached forward first. The German shepherd inhaled carefully, studying the familiar scent that had once been part of every day of his life. Michael stayed perfectly still. Tears continued sliding down his face. Then Duke touched his hand. The contact lasted only a second. A simple brush of a nose against weathered skin. But for Michael, it felt like the end of a nightmare that had lasted 4 years. A broken sound escaped his throat as he wrapped his arms around the dog. Duke did not pull away. He leaned into the embrace. His tail moved weakly against the forest floor. Michael buried his face against the rough fur around the dog's neck and cried openly. The mountains, the years, the unanswered questions, all of it seemed to collapse into that single moment. "I am here, buddy," he whispered. "I am here." For several minutes, neither moved. The wind drifted softly through the pines. Golden sunlight filtered between branches and painted long shadows across the ridge. It was the kind of moment words could never fully describe. Eventually, Michael pulled back enough to look at Duke again. The old collar remained around the dog's neck. Worn, faded, barely holding together. Trembling hands reached toward the metal tag hidden beneath years of dirt. He carefully brushed away debris and finally revealed the engraved surface underneath. The letters were faded but still visible. K9 Duke. Michael closed his eyes. There was no doubt left. No uncertainty. No fear that he might be mistaken. This was Duke. His partner. His friend. The dog everyone else believed was gone forever. As evening approached, Michael opened his backpack and removed food and water. Duke approached cautiously at first. Then hunger overcame hesitation. The German shepherd ate slowly but eagerly. Michael watched in silence, his heart breaking at how thin the dog had become. Yet beneath the sadness came gratitude. Duke had survived. Somehow. Through winters, storms, loneliness, and years of wilderness. He had survived. After resting for a while, Duke followed Michael back toward the cabin clearing. The old dog walked stiffly but remained close now. Every few steps he glanced toward Michael, as though making sure this reunion was real. Michael smiled each time it happened. The habit had not changed. By the time darkness settled across the mountains, a small campfire glowed beside the abandoned cabin. Duke rested near the warmth while Michael sat beside him. Neither needed words. The silence itself felt sacred. Above them, stars slowly appeared between the pine branches. For the first time in 4 years, Michael no longer looked at the mountains with grief. Tonight, the mountains had finally given something back. The journey home began at sunrise. Pale golden light filtered through the mountains as Michael carefully loaded his gear into the truck. Frost sparkled across the grass surrounding the abandoned cabin. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and approaching winter. Duke stood nearby watching every movement. He appeared stronger after food, water, and a night of rest, but the years had clearly taken their toll. His steps remained slow. His frame remained thin. Yet something had changed in his eyes. The loneliness was gone. Before leaving, Michael walked back toward the ridge where they had first seen each other. For a moment, he simply stood there looking across the endless forest. For years earlier, he had left these mountains carrying grief. Today, he was leaving with gratitude. When he turned around, Duke was waiting beside the truck, ready to follow, ready to come home. The drive back to Pine Hollow felt almost unreal. Duke slept through much of the journey, curled on a blanket in the back seat. Occasionally, he opened his eyes and looked toward Michael. Each time their gazes met, the German Shepherd seemed reassured that this was not another dream. Michael felt the same way. More than once he glanced into the rearview mirror simply to make sure Duke was still there. By late afternoon, they reached town. News spread quickly. Small towns always seem to know everything before official announcements are made. People gathered outside storefronts and along sidewalks as the truck rolled through familiar streets. Some recognized Duke immediately. Others needed a moment before disbelief transformed into amazement. The missing K9 had become a legend over the years. Most residents believed they would never see him again. Now he was back. Older, thinner, but alive. When Michael parked outside the police station, several officers stepped outside. Silence filled the parking lot. Nobody seemed quite sure what to say. Then one veteran deputy slowly approached the truck. His eyes widened as Duke stepped down onto the pavement. "I do not believe it," he whispered. The German Shepherd looked around the station grounds. The place had changed in small ways. New vehicles, fresh paint, different faces. Yet some things remained familiar. The scent of the building, the training yard, the old oak tree beside the entrance. Duke stood quietly, taking it all in. Then Michael led him toward the kennel area. The moment they entered, emotion struck harder than expected. For years earlier, Michael had stood inside this same building staring at an empty kennel. Now Duke walked beside him. The old leash finally served its purpose again. The familiar kennel door opened. Duke stepped inside. He sniffed the floor, the corners, the walls. Then he turned around and looked at Michael. His tail moved gently. Michael smiled through tears. "Welcome home, buddy." The following weeks focused on healing. Veterinarians examined Duke carefully. Nutrition plans were created. Medical staff monitored his recovery. Everyone expected the process to take time. But something remarkable happened. As Duke regained strength physically, Michael seemed to recover emotionally. The weight he had carried for 4 years slowly began to lift. The nightmares stopped. The guilt faded. The unanswered questions no longer haunted every quiet moment. Some wounds had never needed explanations. They had only needed closure. And each evening after work, Michael sat beside Duke as the German Shepherd rested comfortably near the place that had waited for him all those years. Together, they began rebuilding a life neither thought they would ever get back. Spring arrived quietly in Pine Hollow. Snow disappeared from the mountains. Rivers flowed freely again, and green returned to the forest that had once hidden so many unanswered questions. Months had passed since Duke came home. Day by day, the old German Shepherd grew stronger. His coat regained its shine. His weight slowly returned. The stiffness in his movements softened. He would never be the young K9 he once was, but that no longer mattered. Nobody expected him to work again. His years of service were over. What remained was something far more valuable: peace. On warm evenings, Michael often sat on the front porch of his small house at the edge of town. The same wooden chair waited beside the railing. The same mountains stood in the distance beneath changing skies. Only one thing was different now. Duke was there. Always there. Sometimes the German Shepherd rested at Michael's feet. Other times he stretched out across the porch boards, lifting his head whenever birds crossed the yard. The simple routine became their favorite part of the day. No radios. No emergencies. No searches. Just silence shared between old partners who no longer needed words. One evening near sunset, golden light spilled across the valley. The air smelled of fresh grass and pine carried down from the hills. Michael sat holding a worn photograph that had remained on his desk for years. The picture showed a younger man and a younger dog after a successful rescue. Back then, neither of them imagined how much life could change. Michael looked from the photograph to Duke lying nearby. The differences were obvious. Gray fur touched the dog's muzzle. Time had marked them both. Yet something deeper remained untouched. Loyalty, trust, love. The things that truly mattered had survived everything. Duke slowly rose and walked toward him. His movements were steady now, stronger than they had been in months. The German shepherd stopped beside the chair and gently rested his head on Michael's knee. It was a simple gesture, one he had made countless times throughout their years together. But tonight it carried a different meaning. Michael placed a hand on the old dog's neck and smiled. Tears filled his eyes again, though this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. For years earlier, he had stood in a blizzard believing he had lost his best friend forever. For years later, that same friend sat beside him watching the sunset. Across the valley, the mountains glowed beneath fading light. Their peaks turned gold, then orange, then purple as evening slowly arrived. Michael looked toward them one final time. For years he had searched those ridges for answers. For years they had given him only silence. Now he understood something he never understood before. The mountains had not taken Duke away. They had simply protected a story whose ending had not yet been written. The breeze moved gently through the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime softly rang. Duke closed his eyes as Michael continued scratching behind his ears. Neither moved. Neither needed to. The long search was over. The waiting was over. The sadness was over. As the last light disappeared beyond the horizon, two old partners sat together in peaceful silence, grateful for a second chance neither thought they would ever receive. And in that quiet moment, it became clear that sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding your way home. It is discovering that home never stopped waiting for you.